Hello, everybody. Welcome to this SoftEd webinar in conjunction with the DTA Public Sector Agility Accelerator. My name is Craig Smith. I'm the Global Agility Lead at SoftEd. I've spent a number of years in the public sector, both for the Australian government as well as assisting in different capacities other governments around the world, including New Zealand, Singapore, and the US.
And hi everyone, my name is Julian Smith. I head up the Agile practice at the Digital Transformation Agency in Australia. I'm very pleased to be here with you all today. For context, I've been working across within digital ways of working for over 2 decades and give talks on public sector agility, particularly with Craig as well. So very pleased to be here with everyone today. We hear the word agile or agile ways of working quite a lot across government. So for example, Scott Morrison, the Australian Prime Minister, recently gave in his talk about the APS review, calling for a more agile and more responsive Australian public service to the public where they lived. Quite similar in New Zealand as well. The New Zealand PM mentioned about a more modern, agile and adaptive public service to meet the challenges of today. So we hear about it quite a lot. Within the Australian public service, there was a landmark review that was landed in December 2019 that had the objective for a more professional, agile, innovative and efficient public service. And we also seen this recently with the launch of the APS workforce strategy as well. So we hear all these words about agility and agile, and we're also hearing it internationally as well. So for instance, the Agile Nations Charter that was signed last year by 7 nations, including UK, Canada, Japan and others, which was a landmark initiative. There was also OECD with their reports, the UK government with their guidance for governance, as well as in the US, where they've done some very large scale initiatives about public sector agility, including a guide which involved 400 Agile experts across the US, and also through World Economic Forum and the variety of different consultancies. So we know it is important for us to meet the challenges of today. So in terms of why Agile or why Agile ways of working, there's a lot of different definitions, but quite commonly across a number of these different frameworks and approaches, it talks about the urgent need for governments today to use Agile ways of working in response to the environment that we're faced with. An environment with digital transformation, where we've got rapid technology change, uncertain socio-economic environments, as well as operating within fiscal constraints. Now we've got a short video from Agile Nations that describes this a bit further.
Innovation and new technology is absolutely key to solving the challenges that we all face.
Widespread disruption from pandemic has made it even more pressing for countries to develop new engines of growth and business models, as well as pivot to greater digitalization.
Technology is continuously giving us new ways to live our lives, to interact with each other, to shape the world around us.
As a tech startup, we need governments to develop more flexible, interoperable regulatory frameworks so that we can introduce and scale up our ideas around the world.
How can we improve our governance and create a future governance that is more innovative, more agile, more resilient?
The COVID-19 pandemic has stressed the need for innovative solutions to the benefit of our societies.
Good rulemaking can enable the businesses to rapidly scale up, create good jobs, and allow emerging innovations to drive economic growth and also offer solutions.
We clearly have further to go to reform our rulemaking to make it easier for great ideas to enter our markets while mitigating the risks.
We need more flexibility in developing, applying and enforcing regulations.
A fundamental rethinking of rulemaking is needed to realize the benefits of innovation.
Collaboration on flexible approaches to governing new emerging technologies is critical to help businesses bring responsible technology-enabled innovations to market and grow them globally.
Cross-border collaboration of regulators is the best way to avoid unnecessary divergence that could hamper innovation.
The time is ready to extend and apply the testing of agile regulation within the international cooperation among countries.
And it is through international regulatory cooperation that we're going to get the best to deliver for our economies and for our citizens. They have a right and we have an obligation to allow innovation to deliver for them.
So with all that, what is Agile anyway?
Yeah, thanks, Julian. So I think one of the things, I mean, a lot of people on this call will be familiar with this. So, this is not going to be an Agile 101, but I think one of the things to think about is that we did traditionally start in IT. And, this Agile journey has been going for 20 years. The manifesto was just celebrated its 20th anniversary back in February. I mean, the word software was written through there. But it's evolved into this thing across the organization, business agility, those type of things. The thing is, though, that the whole landscape has got very complicated, and can send you into a spin. There's just so many different frameworks out there, from scaling frameworks to some of the originals to things like DevOps, different providers. In fact, I did a talk a few years ago called 40 Agile Methods in 40 Minutes, which was really just to tell people in some of these frameworks that there's another 39 things out there. But there's so many things. Where do you start? But more importantly, how do you actually then make that stick, particularly in a government context? And as you're all probably aware, I mean, Agile is a mindset. If we bring it back to the manifesto, it's described by 4 values, defined by 12 principles. But the practices, whether they're the existing practices that we have, practices from different frameworks, or things that we invent newly, that's really what agility is all about. The interesting thing is, I guess, that some of you may have seen this, that we usually struggle with essentially more about what not is Agile. The Agile thing is been around for a long time now. I really love this. This is the U.S. Department of Defense's No Agile or Agile No BS guide, which it's just short and sharp and to the point. Are you doing these things? Are you delivering software frequently? Are you empowered to make decisions? Are you taking feedback? Are you changing the process? These are the questions that we do need to ask in our organizations and in the public service. Now, I am starting a movement, and because the word Agile has just over 20 years become so overloaded that, in fact, I've been starting this movement for a number of years now, and I'd like you all to join up with me, if you will, is that let's stop calling it Agile, and I want to call it Raccoon. Are you with me there, Julian?
I'm with you. It's Raccoon all the way.
Right. Why? It's a little just a play on words, but the thing is that we sometimes spend so much time walking around the place, talking about Agile this and Agile that it becomes very process orientated. The word's not the important thing; it's what we do with it. And we sort of run a danger that now there's this almost, people kind of walk around and they almost hear the word Agile and they groan, which is not what the original intent was. The thing is that I think, what we try to do is unpack it. I mean, Agile isn't easy. It doesn't come easy. You don't sprinkle Agile fairy dust. It doesn't come in a box. It's not safe. That's a play on words. But it's not those things. You have to think about it in, what delivery and what problems that we're actually trying to solve. And in fact, if you kind of look at the model for change, we naively expect that we send a bunch of people off to training, or we introduce it into a couple of teams, and it's going to be this nice, great sort of journey. But the reality is that I suspect almost everybody on this kind of call is in this trough of disillusionment, is what Virginia Satir calls it, where we're trying to pull people through to the other side. And so the thing is, how can we help each other? What are the things we need to do to help us pull us through so we do get to that promised land that we're all trying to get to?
So why Agile? Why go through the trough in the first place? By the way, Craig, I like the concept of Agile dust. I think that could be a new business venture there. But why Agile? So it's in response to the changing times that we're living in today. The VUCA model, which came out from the US military back in the early 90s, talk about volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And in an environment that has all those 4 things, you need to embrace change. And they talked about some of the antidote, like vision, understanding, clarity, and agility. The 4th industrial revolution from the World Economic Forum has coined it. You can kind of think of it like traditional projects are like a catapult, where we batch up a large projects and we put them on a catapult and we're trying to aim for a target. So we kind of batch up these huge initiatives, which can be within a public sector context, as we know, it can be the hundreds of millions. into billions of dollars. But in the environment that we live in today, we've got this changing winds of socio-economic changes. We've got rapid technology change. We've got market and industry forces and changing citizen expectations. The technology that is here today won't be here tomorrow. So this requires us to have a new way. It's a lot harder to hit those targets from those traditional multi-year projects. So what Agile does is break these large initiatives down into smaller bite-sized pieces. It's like comparing it with a catapult to a slingshot, something where we get close to the target, where we can break things down to the most valuable and most important elements of these initiatives and might get much closer. So we also reduce risk as well. What this enables us to do by breaking up our large initiatives enables us to actually realise value sooner. So as we know, with a traditional approach, we would be waiting 1, 2, even 5 years before we actually realise the value once our digital service goes live. With an Agile-based approach, because we're breaking things down into small bite-sized pieces and doing it iteratively, we can able to test our critical assumptions and realise value much earlier. So the Agile curve looks more like an S curve. What this enables us to do is once we've actually delivered 80% of the value, for example, we can even make a decision. We can even stop the initiative and even give back money to government. Wouldn't that be a nice thing? This also enables us, importantly for government, is to reduce risk. Now, with a traditional approach, we're only testing our critical assumptions at the end when we've actually gone live or launched something. With Agile, we're testing our most critical and most important assumptions up front and early. So this enables us to reduce risk considerably. Now, there's a lot of different case studies across the world that we've canvassed. There's a lot of good information and stats there. We won't go through them today, but we'll encourage to share them afterwards as well. This requires us to take a different approach. So value and user centricity is a key component from a lot of the different models that we talked about earlier. Now, it changes the traditional triple constraints. So as we know, with traditional digital and ICT initiatives, we have scope, cost, and schedule as the major constraints. Jim Heinz-Smith came out with a model which is called the Agile Triangle, where value is at the top of the triangle, followed by quality. Now, the constraints don't go away. They're still there. We still have budgets. We still have even deadlines. But most importantly, value becomes at the top of the triangle. To better understand value, however, we need to understand our citizens better. So for instance, a lot of models out there talk about citizen centricity, putting our customers at the heart of our government services. Now, there's a lot of great models and frameworks out there to explore value. This is a really good one from Harvard, where it talks about the different elements of value. And they break it down from a citizen point of view, for instance, from life-changing to emotional to functional as well. So it requires us to have a closer contact with our own citizens to understand what truly motivates them and what is valuable for them as well.
So in recent times, there's been a lot of work from governments around the world in bringing agility and, more importantly, digital service standards to play. So the Australian government, so Julian represents from the DTA here, has a digital service standard, as do many other governments, and Agile is right in there. There's number 3, the Agile and user-centered process. The thing is that the focus very much is on user-centered delivery. Here's the DSS standard. There's 13 points there. It has things in there. Number 1, understanding user needs. I mean, that lines up directly with the manifesto, where that focus is on the customer. Sustainable multidisciplinary teams, tools and systems to build and operate the service, data and information, responsive design, open standards, testing from end to end. So, focus on quality, and of course, building with an agile and user-centered approach. So it's bringing those two things together, the HCD area and the agile area. Now, we're not alone in this. I know we have people in this watching this recording from all around the world. And all of this really came from the granddaddy, which was the digital service standard from gov.uk. New Zealand has recently put their digital service standard out there. The US has the US Digital Services Playbook. India has a digital services life cycle. Singapore, governments around the world are using adopting similar things, because government is government, regardless of where you are. They're just all subtly different wherever you are in the world. So this all kind of comes back to human-centered design. One of the things is, and I think the authors of the manifesto were very smart when they kind of put that focus on the customer in the manifesto, because it's meant things like human-centered design actually operate extremely well within that context. And this is the double diamond. Many of you would have seen this. Making sure at the start that we firstly diverge around things like research, we converge back around a definition to make sure we're designing the right thing before we then design it right by ideating, prototyping, and getting some validation. And the idea of this is that it's an iterative loop. It's not that you do it once; you actually revolve around that many times. Things like the Google Sprint process, for example, that's well known. Jake Knapp in his Sprint book talks about that, where you do this process in a week. I've done this process in a couple of days for different organizations. So human-centered design is really that starting point, that missing link that we often have in Agile teams about how we actually get our mobilization and actually go through our discovery process. And so the thing is that it's actually hard to find a diagram. And I do like this diagram from Johnny Schneider, where it talks about how do we bring design thinking and the Agile mindset together, because it's really about those two things. But then the third one, which is the lean mindset. So design thinking is really about that vision and bringing together the strategy. The lean mindset is how the organization aligns to the purpose and brings together all the leadership. And of course, the Agile mindset is how we really focus on the delivery and bringing all those things together. The problem with all this, though, is you sometimes end up with this thing called fake Agile or faux Agile, where we kind of fall into this kind of process where the iteration only really happens within the middle of the process, where really what we're trying to have is that iterative process all the way through. And I think partly the problem to this is that if you look to even the DTA's guidance, this is from the Little Book of Digital, which is a great publication, by the way, and particularly if you're working in government, go grab it from the DTA website. We'll send a link to it. But as described, it looks like this, and it looks very much you start with discovery, you move to alpha, you move to beta, then you move to live. The problem is what it ends up looking like is a little like this next diagram here, which is actually more of a waterfall, because you do all the discovery, you do all the alpha, you do all the beta, and then you move to live. And that wasn't really the intent, because what that turns into is what is often famously called water scrum fall, which we have all that discovery work up front, we do all the work in the middle, and then finally we get to the bit at the end. There's water scrum fall. So what it meant was this. This is the same diagram from the DTA, but as you can see the green and the yellow, and I've added a few arrows in here. It makes it a little more confusing, so apologies to whoever did the diagram originally, but this was the real intent. It was continuous human-centered design and agility working side by side in order to get us valuable delivery. So the thing is, the guidance is discovery, right, is supposed to take a few weeks. The guidance says anywhere up to about 12 weeks, and that's fine. But the thing is that you can start then moving into alpha. Right? Alpha is where you really start understanding those user needs. And the thing is that you don't get to the end of alpha before you go to beta. You can start doing dual track delivery, as Jeff Patton calls it, lightweight governance, pushing things over to the engineers, because one of the criticisms we often see from a lot of government agencies is that people like the engineering teams are sitting around twiddling their thumbs, waiting for requirements to come down. Again, that's just the water scrum fall. It's the very waterfall processes, where the whole thing around collaboration means we can continue to move, which means that whilst we're still putting our focus on human-centered design and putting the user first, we're also getting valuable feedback when we try to build things, use things like our sprint reviews and those type of mechanisms that we have in agility to get feedback. So the idea is that we're constantly moving through that alpha beta stage, particularly in parallel. Now, there's lots of things you can do. The DTA has guidance around assessments and things that can help you move through that, and they're really great. Sometimes they can be a little heavyweight. So one of the things that we have been working on is a definition of done in Agile terms. Not that you're ever really done with these things, but to give you some guidance to know, actually, have we hit all the things we need to in discovery, alpha, and beta? And again, we'll make a link to this available at the end of the webinar.
So another key element of public sector agility is about reducing waste and improving value realisation. So as people might be aware, the PMI does a landmark report every couple of years called the PMI Pulse of Profession. And this is where they measure the amount of project waste. This is pure project waste across the world. Now, as you can see, there is quite a lot globally, including for Australia, where we have been at the bottom for the last couple of years. So there's definitely room to improve. They do highlight in the pulse of the profession that it's important to also consider agile ways of working to be able to test our critical assumptions before putting in large investments, so we can actually make more informed decisions on our investments. Now, there's a lot of really great research about this, quite a lot of extensive research. This comes from the Standish Group. The Standish Group have been reviewing projects over a 20-year period. I believe it was around 50,000 projects in their database. So they've done a lot of research in this space. The interesting thing that they found was that agile projects had less likely to fail than other types of approaches, which is some really interesting statistics. They also found interesting that only 64% of features are rarely to never used. So in terms of the work, the initiatives that we're doing, as we were talking about the catapult earlier, about the big batch of projects, it's interesting to consider that if we're spending $100 million and 64% is rarely ever used, are we using the best that we can use, particularly from the public purse? Now, this is taking a different approach. It can be considered big bets versus small bets. So traditional initiative, you may have 100% committed work. You may have got funding approved from your treasury area or from your finance area for a large committed initiative, for example, which, as we know, can cost into the tens, the hundreds, or even into the billions of dollars. Now, taking a more agile or lean agile approach is actually testing some of these critical assumptions early and providing that evidence before getting further funding. So it's committing to less work and testing some of our critical assumptions early. This actually pivots us to a different approach in government. It's kind of pivoting to us like we're testing our hypotheses, just like a lab, just like government like a lab. Now, another important thing to consider is your organisation is a value factory, and it's important that it makes sure that it flows smoothly and efficiently. We touched on earlier about the importance of value and understanding our citizens' value as well, including through discovery phases. Now, a key part of agility is about shortening the value stream. Now, when we talk about value stream is something from an idea to realising value. So in government, we work on some of the wickedest problems that we have, whether it's homelessness, whether it's unemployment, whether it's healthcare and other items as well. So if we've got an idea about how we can move the needle, what is the steps that it take? So, to actually make that change. Now, with some of the traditional approaches, as we know, it can take a year to get through investment processes. It can go through analysis, development, testing, and then finally to releasing our ideas. And as we know, if we're not testing our hypotheses, by the time you get to the end over the last couple of years, it might not even hit the mark from our end users. So it requires us to take a bit of a different approach, to look at that end-to-end value stream from idea right through to realizing value and seeing how we can shorten it. Taking an agile-based approach is when you're doing your discovery, engaging with end users up front, testing your hypotheses straight away and doing that important user research, including getting out there, doing the lightweight tests, as Craig mentioned before, during alpha, and then getting it working with teams to test our hypotheses and realizing real value to end users and continuously getting that feedback as well. Now, this could actually have fundamental changes from a public sector perspective. Now, this slide is something I quite like from the US Department of Defense, from their procurement area. They're actually quite big adopters of agile ways of working, and some of their generals talk about it as not only something for software delivery, but also for a strategic advantage on the battlefield. Because if they can maneuver and be quicker and faster than the enemy, then they're more likely to win those battles. The thing I like about this slide is that they talked about their process of change, and they said that everything changed as part of their progress. Things from not only their software delivery practices, but also their governance, their funding models, their culture, and even organizational structure as well needed to change as part of this transition. One really useful activity is to actually gather people around from your individual agencies, from your government agencies, and conduct a value stream mapping activity. It's quite simple to do. We've done it in a number of different government agencies, and it's highly effective. You pick people from different areas, from your leading areas, and you map out, could be on sticky notes or even on a whiteboard, what is the high-level steps and how long does it take? What governance hoops? And seeing how we can shorten the value stream, but importantly also keeping that important governance to make sure that we're not rocking the boat as well.
So let's now get sort of put the rubber on the road. How do we start to accelerate or continue the acceleration of government agility? Well, the first thing is that in reality, it's all about business agility. And this is something that I'm seeing a lot through government is that, despite that history of IT, actually it's the engine of government, which we often call business agility, that's driving this. This is a great diagram. I love this because it kind of tells us where we want to be. And the end state is down there at the red end. And in fact, we're doing pretty well. If we think about it, team agility's been around for 25 years since things like Scrum, and that's fairly mature within lots of areas of government. We do things like we measure team health, we have lots of training, and teams and MDTs and all those types of things are set up. And we've got team of teams, a lot of scaling and different things going on, particularly in large initiatives. So, the scaling methods, DevOps is starting to perpetrate true. Leadership are talking about this a lot more than they ever did. And that's about where we are on the journey. But, there's so much more to do. We haven't even scratched the surface. And the next level is, of course, the organization agility. That's when we really start to think about, sorry, Julian, if you go one back, the organization agility is where we, think about the portfolio, making sure that actually, starting to challenge things like the way we fund things, the value stream that Julian was just talking about, and talking about product models and starting to think a little differently. We then move through to all the other parts of the engine. So, we have to have all the different spaces, people like your HR, operations, finance, legal, really then bringing that all to the fore. It just can't be just the IT area or a certain set of projects that are doing this. True agility comes from the entire organization working like that. And that's really that last step, which is enterprise business agility, where now we're really starting to anticipate customer needs, where the focus is not reacting to what might be happening in the world, but actually being very innovative and coming ahead of it. So as it says, disrupt before being disrupted, and having a real learning culture. There's lots of things to do there, and we're only sort of partway on the journey, and that's that's our call to action as we move through this. Now, the thing is that, this is, again, nothing new. This is the work of Frederick Laloux on the left there from his book, Reinventing Organizations. The interesting thing is that, this book, whilst a few years old, really puts, government, in that little yellow sector down the bottom. When we think about the organizations that are the aspiration, we talk about that being the teal level. I'm not really sure about whether, all organizations need to get all the way to teal, but the thing is that we do need to move, as you can see through that arrow there. Green level is where we really want to achieve to get to. So we've got to get through, more like large organizations, innovation and accountability, but, really to that whole idea of what Julian was alluding to before, delighting customers, shared values, cultural type changes, empowering people is a really important step. And the thing we do have to look out for is this idea of Conway's law. Conway's law is very simple. It says that your organizational structure will look like the way that your projects and systems are developed underneath, and vice versa. And the best way you can look at that is go and look at any sort of large organization or government entity when you're trying to find some information. And you can sometimes be very befuddled about the way that it's laid out. And that's because of the way that we've actually set the hierarchy or the structure of the organization. That's not always the best thing for users, particularly if we're going to a user-first model, like, for example, that was in the DSS.
So public sector agility, there's a lot of different definitions about it. I think we've touched on a range of different frameworks that are out there. This particular definition we quite like. It's adapted from a couple of them, which talks about the ability of government entities to operate successfully in a rapidly changing and complex operating environment by producing high quality, high performance, citizen-centric goods and services. So again, with the citizen centricity there. So what we've done is we've actually analysed a range of the different frameworks out there. This is just a picture of the 5 ones that are out there, but we've had a look at all the different frameworks and methods out there to kind of boil down what are the key elements, and particularly what are some of the key success factors? What are some of the things that are working well, and what are some of the things that are holding back government agencies from adopting these practices that they're so eager to adopt? Now, what we found from this research, which has been going on for quite a number of years, is that it requires a systems approach to agility. So it's being able to look at the different levers within an organisation setting. So basically going back to what Craig was mentioning about reinventing our organisations, looking at the broader ecosystem within our government organisations and seeing it as a complex ecosystem. And looking at what are some of the push-pull factors that are either hindering agility or that can help us some of our strengths as well. We found that culture is quite a strong area. We've tested this with quite a number of different governments and areas, and also to consider the different elements as well.
So one of the things that sort of thinking about that, we were trying to think about how can we actually have the conversation and what are the areas we need to look at? As we saw in that diagram I showed you a little earlier, we've kind of got the teams thing, and a lot of people sort of think, well, if we get the MDTs in place and we start doing the work, then we can tick the box and we've got agility there. But, as we've seen, there's a lot more to it. So one of the things to help that, we've put this together called the government agility model. So here's what it looks like. So if we kind of work our way through, first, if we start at the bottom, those agile values and principles are so very key. Whether that be the Agile Manifesto or your own sort of take on that, the true sense of agility, or raccoon as I refer to it, is that very base of the model. Of course, we need to have enabling technology to get there. And if nothing else in the last 12 months, as we've seen, as we've all been forced to work in different places, enabling technology is so key for us to get things done. So, this is things like just being able to turn up and have, things like internet to be able to collaborate. But of course, the tools that sit on top of that, you can work from anywhere or collaborate with different people. We saw that again in the OECD video, that whole idea of not just ourselves, but how can we collaborate with other governments and perhaps our state governments and things like that. All those type of things do require enabling technology to do it. And of course, we've got to be very careful. Agile is the vehicle, not the destination, and the day-to-day operations of government are key. So, keeping those lights on, whether you be in the services area or the tax area or whatever it might be, those services that we provide to citizens of our country are so very crucial. So that also sits at the foundation. We've always got to remember that that's essentially what we're servicing, is helping citizens in order to get the services they need.
It requires us, we've got 7 pillars across the top, which kind of hold up the government agility model roof. So in terms of these key pillars, it's really important to consider each one as well. So for instance, citizen centricity, this is about user research, systems and design thinking, life event journey. So from a user's end-to-end journey or life event, from giving a child to getting to hospital, to getting an education and so on. Co-design, so true co-design with our citizens, rapid feedback loops, so having those feedback loops as we're going, testing and validating hypotheses as well, so being able to test and break down our initiatives and test the individual assumptions as well. Portfolio management was another key element that we found from our research. So portfolio management, including purpose and value driven, so it's well understood within the organisation. Strategies, outcome alignment. So we've got all these self-organising teams, but they're aligned and they've got guardrails in place, and they're given the go-ahead and the trust to move forward with their work. Lean portfolio management, adaptive and horizon-based funding, user government outcome metrics. So this is about what dials are we actually shifting, which is very important. Lean agile governance as well. We're followed by organisation structure design. So we need an optimised hierarchy. So within government, we can't escape hierarchy, but how can we optimise it so we can enable that fast decision making that we need in an agile environment? Also, resource fluidity and mobility, structural flexibility, empowered and self-organising teams, collaboration culture, and a minimum viable bureaucracy. So if we have empowered teams, how can they be trusted whilst having guardrails in place to make decisions and test their hypotheses? Leadership and culture is in the middle pillar. We've got psychological safety, which is very critically important. We've got teams who are breaking down work, being able to be safe to fail, which is so important. If we're breaking down our initiatives into test smaller hypotheses, we've got to be able to encourage people to test things and fail fast, importantly. Agile leadership as well, which is we found very critical. Decentralized decision-making, alignment and autonomy, continuous learning, as well as a growth mindset. And growth mindset is very important in terms of that continual learning and development and getting better as well.
A little of a push when we get to the next pillar within a lot of organizations going in the Agile path to move towards more of a product model from a project model. And that's really what this next pillar is about. In government, it's a lot to do with services as well. So services and products, sometimes a bit of an interchangeable term, and work together. So things like multidisciplinary Agile teams, bringing together the people who look after those services or the drivers for those with the people who can actually deliver it, and not having to throw things across a wall between silos. Doing Agile planning at scale. There's lots of different approaches to doing that. And we haven't even, I don't think in the community, really scratched the surface of how we can really do that optimally. There's still a lot of work to be done there. Of course, being innovative. We often think about government perhaps not being that place, but some of the most innovative things that we're doing comes from a government context. And so how can we even play that up and then also attract people to come and work with us, to actually do the real fun stuff. Driving decisions through data, building quality in is so vitally important, and all the things that Agile then forces you to do in relation to quality and testing, and experimentation and feedback, being able to match that back with the human-centered design we talked about. Of course, we need continuous improvement. So a learning organization that is open to being safe to learn. And we often talk about safe to fail. I prefer safe to learn. Optimizing the whole. So actually, being able to look end to end. We talked about the water scrum fall a little earlier, because actually it's all the stuff that happens to the left and right of the work that's so vitally important, and that cycle time and the process of things going through, as well as remembering that there's still operations happening. So how can we continue to feed that cycle? Communities of practice so that people can get together and work, capability uplift in all sorts of different areas, even things like having coaching, mentoring and support, how we facilitate more collaboration. Continuous process improvement is obviously key, as well as managing the people and talent. And of course, technology, and we talked about that as it enables it, but of course we have to think a little differently about how we approach it. So, continuous delivery, how we can have things moving out at a more rapid nature. So things like DevSecOps help with that. Technical excellence, where we're actually pushing the barriers in relation to that. So, good shared services that make sure that all the things just work, coupled with automation that's so vitally key to what we do, and being very looking at emergent modern technology. So we're talking about things like AI and ML, for example, but obviously all the other things that are coming around the outside. And all of that, if you come up to the roof, is all about valuable and timely outcomes. Right? How can we service our citizens, but at the same time doing that cost effective, but also giving them the services that they need? So we're going to give you a bit of a chance to take a look at this government agility model at the end of the session. We're going to welcome you to explore it yourself, but you can find the model online at governmentagilitymodel.com. So we ask that you go and take a good look at that and use it as a conversation piece. And again, we're going to give you a way that you can have that conversation with your respective organizations. And we may have people on the webinar listening to this, watching this, that perhaps don't work in a government context. Right? All this stuff is actually valid outside of government as well, obviously. So whilst the focus has been here on the public sector, this is something that is equally applicable even in the private sector area. So let's go for a bit of a touchdown. How do we kind of wrap this whole thing up? How can we accelerate agility, Julian?
All right, so we've touched on a number of different points about public sector agility as part of the talk. So some of the key points from today was the world is focused on achieving greater agility in the public sector to operate effectively in this rapidly changing, complex and fiscally constrained operating environment.
Now, we do need to adopt the digital service standard as the default way of operating, but looking into it, not just as it appears, but thinking about how do we really get agility, within that constraint. The simplicity of it is the key. How you actually, put it into practice, that's where some of the challenges are.
We need to also seek to reduce the size of our projects and see work as smaller experiments to test our hypotheses before we give it more funding, to ensure we can test some of our critical assumptions, as well as delivering value sooner to our citizens.
Yeah, and I think the value there is that key word. I think often people, when they think of value, they do think about return on investment, but value is so much more, and we saw that pyramid a little earlier. So what does value mean to us, and how can we focus and realize that value and make sure that we're using the funds and the resources that we have to the best ability?
We need to, as well, focus on our citizens, put them at the seat at the table to not only understand their needs, but also to design with them too, to actually co-design. So we explored that a bit as well, the importance of citizen centricity.
And, we talked about this a lot, but reducing waste, particularly for Australia, where we're kind of on the bottom of that pile, which is, not a good stat to have. But, even so, when you look at the other countries, there's a lot of waste in the process. In fact, I was talking to some people just recently and showed them that slide that you saw earlier. And some of them remarked that they thought that number was very conservatively low, which is probably correct. So, reducing waste is so very important and goes hand in hand with a good Agile process.
And finally, we need to focus not only on Agile teams, but on government business agility. You can kind of think of it like the theory of constraints. We're only as agile as the slowest component of our system, of our end-to-end system. So you can kind of consider it, if one area, if you're waiting for a year within your investment cycle or a couple of years, are we really agile? So looking at that end-to-end ecosystem view is very important. And the government agility model can be a very useful tool that we found with other government agencies to provide you a map to actually examine where are some of the pain points, where are some of the areas that are holding us back in that ecosystem.
So the thing is that, the conversation continues. So, this is just scraping the surface. Hopefully we've given you some things to think about as we've gone through this webinar. We'd love for you to reach out to us. We're still continuing to work, for example, on the government agility model and lots of other things within government. So, any of your ideas or thoughts are welcomed. You can find our email addresses there on the slide. But thank you for taking the time. We hope you've got some value, and we'll see you again real soon. Thank you.